Welcome to Human Biology with Dr. B. Here's our first chapter for the semester. We're going to talk about humans and biology. But first, let's talk about what exactly biology is. Biology, bio meaning life, ology meaning study of. So biology is a study of life, and in this course, we study the biology of humans. This chapter basically goes over, it hits every basic subject that we will be covering this semester. This chapter is a great overview of what we will be covering this semester. First, what constitutes life? Well, we have 7 levels, 7 things that basically tell us, hey, this thing is living. Organization, we have growth and reproduction, metabolism, response to stimuli, homeostasis, and adaptation. So living things have macromolecules. There are 4 major macromolecules that all living things have. They have nucleic acids, which are DNA, the stuff of heredity. DNA is what is passed from mom and dad to babies that allow babies to kind of resemble their parents. Also, ATP, adenosine triphosphate, is a nucleic acid. It is also the energy currency of life. We'll talk about that more as well. Carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are a macromolecule. When I think of carbohydrates, I think of like a tasty cinnamon roll because I love food. But carbohydrates are less complex than that and simply are a 2 to 6 carbon or even more molecule in a line or a ring that also contains oxygen and hydrogen, and energy is stored between the bonds of the carbons. Lipids, also another molecule, typically fats. These are long strands of carbons attached with hydrogen that also store energy between the carbon-to-carbon bonds. And then we have protein. Protein, big tasty steak. That's what protein is. Protein, we'll talk more about the basic structure of it, but also can store energy between its bonds as well. All living things are also composed of cells. Living things can be one cell or as many cells as multiple billions, which is what we are made of. One cellular organism we call a unicellular organism and is in fact a whole unit in and of itself. Living things all grow and reproduce. Down here in the left-hand corner, you can see a unicellular organism dividing and reproducing via asexual reproduction. And over here on the right, you can see an 8-week baby. This baby has a combination of mother's genes and dad's genes, and all of this has come together to form this tiny little embryo. Also, all living things use metabolism. Now, metabolism is defined as all of the reactions that occur within a cell, and it encompasses 2 basic types, catabolism and anabolism. Catabolism is the breakdown of larger molecules, and anabolism is the buildup of molecules. And the only way I remember that is I think of these old guys that are really ripped and huge at the gym, and you just know they've taken anabolic steroids to build up, to build that muscle. And now living things all use raw energy, raw materials in order to produce and to do functions, which we call life. All living organisms respond to their stimuli. It can be as small as sensing one chemical in the watery environment around a unicellular organism, or it can be as broad and complex as your nervous system seeing the light on your screen and your brain translating that into words and definitions and concepts, and also hearing my voice and knowing that what I'm saying actually, or the vibrations that I'm producing, actually is a thing and it means something. So we have our nervous system in humans as well as our musculoskeletal system. And together, both of these work together to produce reactions. Also, homeostasis. Homeostasis, the basic definition of the word, homeo, meaning staying, homeo, same, stasis, staying. So in life, all living organisms want to stay the same. And the way that we do this is by a negative feedback loop. If you look up here at the top, let's see if I can grab my pointer. There we go. We have receptors. Let's talk about heat. So it's a hot day, we go outside, the temperature sensors in your skin say, oh, hey, that sun is really hot. It communicates to the hypothalamus, which is your thermoregulatory center in the brain, and says, hey, it's hot. So then this communicates to effectors called sweat glands and blood vessels that helps your body regulate the temperature. This returns the body to homeostasis. Now, if we stay outside longer and continue to heat up, our body will continue to go around this loop to maintain a stable internal temperature. And then all things evolve and adapt. It can be on a broad scale, such as evolution, as we see over here with these birds. These birds really like green beetles, so they're going to eat all the green beetles. And what does that leave? That leaves the orange beetles. The orange beetles, in this case, have evolved to avoid being eaten so that they can perpetuate their species. Or it can be as simple as an adaptation to circumstances in which more cerebral and external circumstances in which you find yourself. Humans are very complex in that regard. And at the very basis of adaptation, we have natural selection. And natural selection is a selection of individuals with traits that are advantageous to survive over others. Now, when we talk about life, we can also talk about levels of biological organization. At the very basis, the very smallest level of any organization that any living organism has is an atom. An atom is a unit of matter that cannot be separated any further. It's the smallest level of organization that we have. Atoms can be put together to make molecules. Molecules can be put together to create organelles, and within a cell we have numerous organelles that provide specific functions and allow the cell to perform its functions as well and to carry out life. The cell, however, right here is the smallest unit of life. Beyond organelle, a molecule, and an atom, these we consider not yet living. When we put all of this together in a cell, then all of these contribute to the functions of life within that cell. Then we put cells together and make tissues. Now, cells grouped together with a similar function is what we call a tissue. We put tissues together, different types of cells performing specific functions, and we put them together, multiple different types of tissues, to make an organ, such as the heart. And then we put a number of different organs. In this instance, we have our blood vessels as well as our heart to create the cardiovascular system. And then in order to have a large functioning individual, we have a number of organ systems. We will be looking at all of these organ systems in detail this semester. Our cardiovascular system, our respiratory system, our nervous system, our skeletal muscular system, our digestive system, our urinary system, and our reproductive system. So when we get a number of individuals together, we can talk about a population. Now, a population is defined by the scientists looking at the various groupings of individuals. So at Pikes Peak, we could discuss the population of our class, the population of the Health Sciences Division, the population of the Centennial Campus, the population of the Rampart Campus. And when we put a number of populations together, we form a community. And typically, for humans, we think of community more as we're interacting and we're having fun and we're happy. But a community, when defined by science, is several populations interacting together. So for example, we can talk about a lake or a river, and we have the aquatic communities, we have the terrestrial communities, and they all interact together. And this brings into the discussion the ecosystem, where these communities live and how they interact with their environment. And then the largest level of organization of life is the biosphere, which is the earth and all of the areas where life is found. And you're very hard pressed to find an area of the earth in which life is not found. And there you can see it, all the way from the smallest, all the way down to the largest level of organization. Now, we classify organisms according to two major groups. We call them domains, if you will. We have prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Prokaryotes are single-celled organisms that do not have any organelles and do not have a nucleus. They are on orders of magnitude much smaller than any eukaryotic cell. Eukaryotes are defined by the fact that they have a nucleus where they contain all the genetic information, as well as organelles to help them perform more complex functions than a prokaryote. We know prokaryotes primarily as bacteria. Now, within our eukaryotic domain, we are primarily going to look at animals, and within animals we have non-vertebrates and we have vertebrates, and we will be looking at mammals, specifically humans. Within the vertebrate family, we have mammals that feed their young milk from mammary glands, as well as birds and reptiles and fish. How all of this information came about is by the use of the scientific method. Now, the scientific method became very popular and was characterized, that means it was fully defined within the 17th century. And it is a systematic process of observation and asking questions and gathering data. Now, we use the scientific method on a daily basis. It's so ingrained into our society that we don't even think about it. But a great question that I love is, hey, right here. Here, I love this little cartoon. We have an observation. Based on the observation, we ask a question. We do a little bit of research. We form a hypothesis. We then experiment to either falsify that hypothesis or to find more data. We then have gather data, and from that data, we gather conclusions. So the first thing we do is make an observation. Let's say you didn't wake up to your alarm this morning. So you can draw a conclusion from that. That's our observation. So then we ask a question. Was it my alarm's fault or was it my fault? Let's go from the opinion of, hey, it was my alarm's fault. It didn't go off. So then we do a little bit of research to determine, hey, was that little green button turned on or was it not? So it was turned on. So that allows us to form a hypothesis. I did not wake up this morning because I slept through my alarm. Okay, so let's gather some more data and see if we can prove if we actually are a light or heavy sleeper that would allow us to actually sleep through that blaring alarm. A hypothesis is not a question, it is a statement. Now, with a hypothesis, we can never prove a hypothesis true, but we can prove it false. And once we prove one hypothesis false, we can then continue to make other hypotheses. So in science, we never say anything is true except for, as we'll talk later, a law. Up until now, it's about a theory if we have a lot of evidence towards it. Then we do an experiment. So in our experiment, we're going to set our alarm and we're going to see if we wake up the next morning. Now, on a broader scale, scientists use what are called controlled experiments, where we have two groups, a control group and an experimental group. And the experimental group is the group that receives the treatment. So for this experiment, we see, oh, hey, does oatmeal, the hypothesis, it's a statement. Eating oatmeal lowers blood cholesterol. So then we have our prediction, we perform our experiment, and we have 4 different experimental groups. Now the control group does not get the variable, the experimental variable, so that we can simply look at our data and say, yes, this difference that we see, if in this case we're hoping for a drop in cholesterol, is due to eating of oatmeal. So then we collect and analyze data. So in our example of I'm a heavy sleeper or I just don't care about my alarm, we collect data. So we set our alarm for the next morning and we see if we wake up to our alarm or if we just ignore it and sleep through it. Now, in a larger experiment, we would get statistics and maybe make a graph based on this, but for our purposes, we're just going to take mental note. Oh, yeah, I didn't wake up today either. So then, based on our data, we could do this for a few days. We draw a conclusion. Hey, my conclusion is that I really hate waking up and I'm really tired. So I might need to set a few more alarms in order to wake up. Now, usually after a conclusion, and after we've done our first set of experiment, it leads us to make more hypotheses, which I just did. Okay, so I'm clearly a heavier sleeper than I thought. My next hypothesis is I need to set more than one alarm to wake up. And with any experiment, as with anything in science, we typically repeat it 3 times. Why 3? because 3, we have a tiebreaker. And once we have a lot of data that proves towards one direction of the hypothesis, and we've proved it, and we have a really robust collection of data that says, yes, this is what we think, then this becomes a theory. The best example of that is a theory of evolution. Now, we cannot make evolution a law because human lives and brains are finite. And evolution occurs over multiple generations, multiple hundreds of years. So it's virtually impossible to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is happening. However, we have a lot of evidence that evolution and natural selection actually occur. And I love looking at epidemiological studies. This is one way that we can actually study large population data. So it's so apropos for what we're going through right now in Colorado. This is a yearly look at the data for how many people came down with the flu in various states. Now, if you'll notice, gray says that the flu is widespread. Oh my goodness, we see gray here, we see gray here, and then Oklahoma. What the heck, Oklahoma? So, based on this presentation of the data, we can see that the flu is highly concentrated and widespread in the coastal areas on both the east and the west coast. So then we can draw some more conclusions from this. Okay, so why would it be concentrated in the coastal areas? Well, first of all, these are all very highly populated areas. Over here and over here. Second, if we have a lot of immigration and traveling in and out of this area. So a lot of opportunity to bring the flu in and out. Oklahoma over here is our anomaly. Like, what the heck, Oklahoma? Are they just not getting the vaccine? Let's discuss. So at the end of chapter 1, you should be able to do these 5 things. List the main characteristics of life and describe why each characteristic is important and what each contributes to life as an overarching theme. The 2 classifications of organisms. And you need to list the major levels of organization in life, describe the scientific method, and to be able to apply it to everyday issues. Guys, thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time.